Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Scott Miller Barry, a filmmaker and festival programmer I first got to know as the director of Toronto's Images Festival, which he ran for 10 years. He's now the managing director at Workman Arts and one of the programmers of their Rendezvous with Madness Film Festival, which gets underway this Thursday, October 28th, in a hybrid edition. There's a lot of good stuff there, in person and online, and you should check it out. Scott chose Born in Flames, Lizzie Borden's DIY Future Shock feature starring Adele Berthet and Honey as two feminist broadcasters in a totalitarian America pulled into the resistance after the suspicious death of an activist in police custody. Produced over 5 years and released in 1983, just as Ronald Reagan was gearing up to run for a second term, it's a primer for direct action and intersectional feminism in the face of an oppressive white patriarchy. And yeah, if you were wondering, its concerns are still entirely valid today. This is Someone Else's Movie.
For me, I just can't get enough of it. I can never watch it enough. I can never recommend it enough. I can never screen it, share it enough. It's funny. I chose Safe by Todd Haynes first, to be fair.
Sure.
Because the festival I work at, Rendezvous with Madness, happens to be showing it on Halloween this year. So the timing just seemed pretty in sync. But I chose Born in Flames because it also is a film that I think is equally known and not known at all, right? It kind of exists in this, or people, even if they know of it, they've never seen it. It hasn't always been the easiest film to see. It was out of print for a while, and etc. So, but I chose it because I just love it. I never tire of it.
Yeah, until the 2016 restoration, right? That's when it was released to the Film Foundation. The one good thing the Hollywood Foreign Press Association has ever done was co-sponsor it, or co-fund it, in fact. I don't think you could count on people knowing what it was until it got back out.
I mean, I don't want to go full deep nerd programmer, but I think it was only available on 16 millimeter from First Run Features, and then it had a VHS release, of course, at some point.
Yeah, that's how I saw it.
Yeah, and then so I think then you're down to public libraries that might still have the VHS. I was lucky to screen it a couple times from First Run on 16 millimeter, but you're right. Until 2016, I think it was Anthology Film Archives, along with was it the Academy? Yeah, Academy.
Hollywood Foreign Press and Film Foundation. Yeah.
Correct. Yes, right. The Film Foundation. They struck a brand new 35 millimeter print, which played at TIFF here in Toronto with Lizzie Borden in person, which is quite exciting. Yeah, it's one of those films where it's like its reputation kind of precedes it, and then of course people are like, "But how can I watch it?" And luckily now, at least in Toronto, it's available on Canopy through the Toronto Public Library. It's also on Vimeo.
And Apple TV has it for 99 cents this week somehow as a rental.
Okay, listeners, what are you waiting for? 99 cents.
Yeah, pause this, watch that, unpause this. What's amazing about it to me now, because I revisited it yesterday for sadly more than 99 cents. It's fine. It's fine. Hopefully Lizzie Borden gets some of the money. What's amazing about it now is the fact that it doesn't seem to have aged. Like, it's really strange. It's a guerrilla movie made for no money in New York, like shot over 5 years. I think it's something like $33,000 in toto. And it feels like a transmission from now. Like the attitude, we have caught up somehow. This radical queer feminist vision is happening all around us. And the clothes even kind of look the same.
Yeah. I just thought of another answer to your first question. It's important before I respond to your comments is I'm a diehard feminist. I'm also someone who I believe in revolution, and I personally, believe in liberation for all people. So that's one of the reasons I keep coming back to this film. And it's a so-called science fiction 10 years in the future in New York City, where mostly non-white women, a mix of lesbians and Black and Latina and white women get together and overthrow the government and the media. This is it. And you're so right. It's it's literally no budget. It's shot on mostly handheld 16 millimeter film that was, my hunches, was expired, or it's very, very rough and tumble. It has a very lo-fi aesthetic. It was written, and maybe I'll blab more about this later, but it was written mostly collectively. It didn't have it wasn't traditionally scripted, and produced, right? So it evolved over 5 years, literally collectively. And yet, almost 30 years later, 40 years later.
Yeah.
What year is it? It feels like it could be brand new. Like there's something about it that it's like, and for me, a lot of that is the energy in the cinematography, and just in the messages, in the themes, which I'm sure we'll chat about. But it's like there's something about the pace and the even though it's analog media, which of course, as an analog person I love, it's radio and it's print newspapers.
Yeah.
This is the vehicle for the revolution in the 1990s, I guess, the future 1990s,
the quote unquote 90s. Yeah.
Right. It's like, it still feels so current. It's just there's something so magical, I think, about what Lizzie shepherded, right? She said it, Tiff, she doesn't think of herself as the director, that she was forced to put her name on it that way. But she doesn't even to this day, she doesn't think of herself as the director. She was just kind of like the facilitator, That's
interesting. It really,
it is.
Yeah, it does feel like a collective work, in that, like, you can almost hear the voices of people behind the camera shouting back and forth with the material they're shooting. It felt, watching it this time, it feels like an Occupy movie. It feels like it grew out of that movement specifically, or that the Occupy movement is the thing that this is predicting. Although that was a little more diverse in terms of gender and ultimately in terms of ideology than what we see going on here. But the sense of a movement happening in front of the camera, that's what I take away from Born in Flames. Like it doesn't feel rehearsed. It doesn't feel practiced. And in the best possible way. Yeah. It's messy. Yeah. But it has a point of view, and it has this momentum that carries you from beginning to end. It's only 80 minutes long, but it feels like half that.
Yeah, that's
just
true.
Fires through the narrative.
That's true. It's funny you say that, because I felt that I haven't seen it in a few years, but when I watched it yesterday, I thought, wow, doesn't feel it feels so much shorter than 80 minutes. It's like so much is happening. That scene where the woman is aggressed on the street, and then because the women are running the show, the bike, the multicultural, bike cops support. Cops is not the right word, but the bike.
How would you describe them?
Well, I'm thinking of guardian angels is the term that the guardian angels who come to their rescue, to her rescue rather. It feels almost unrehearsed. It feels like, it almost feels like activist video. Like documenting, which I get, compares to your Occupy, metaphor. It's like, this is happening. It's like this is happening right now. And I also think, and I know this came up at the Q&A, with the Me Too and Time's Up movements, it's like we're again reminded of, it's like how rare it is to have a film like this, in some sort of popular canon, right? That's like, or it's written and produced by women and acted, largely by women in terms of the main characters. The men aren't treated so good, which is a very, very good thing.
Well, especially as a commentary on the Reagan Revolution, which made no room for women at all, right? This is a film where the white men we see are suit and tie Republicans, basically, right? I mean, it's the other thing too, is that it always surprises me that it was released 3 years before, I think, or 2 years before Atwood published The Handmaid's Tale, because they've always gone together in my mind. They sort of they operate in tandem. And I probably have the timeline wrong on that. Maybe The Handmaid's Tale was published in 84, 85, but Borden was there first. And the state she's portraying is not too far from the sort of casual totalitarianism in Atwood's book. The sense that all the things that needed to happen have already happened to put these people in charge, and they're never giving it up. So of course you have organized rebellion from the people who are most marginalized by their policies. And the more time you spend with Borden's characters, the more, well, I wasn't going to say the more right they are. They're right from the very beginning, but it's like even the radical ones start to sound reasonable because I kind of agree with literally everything they're saying.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, you know, if you've ever been a part of organizing anything political, it's like knowing that you're being watched somehow, somewhere, like that's just kind of understood, right? Or knowing that that the authorities, of course, have, you know, not just a theory, but they have a way of knowing, you know, or analyzing how people are organizing and why. So like, there's just so many lines in the film that, you know, like there's that line that the cop says, you know, it's like, we don't even know how the hierarchy is structured. And it's like, well, that is like, you know, whether it was improv or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's like that is it, right? It's like the, you know, the film, of course, the film sets it up nicely as us, you know, us and them, you know, and the women's army, you know, who is running the show, is fighting, you know, the powers, the greater powers that be. But it's like those systems, it's like, I don't know. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say. It's like the film does this beauty. It's like, it's this beautiful job of being so political, but also so kind of funny, you know, like not at the expense of the characters, but it's like, it's really pointing out how absurd, you know, the authorities actually are to this day, right? And how they target certain people. But it's like, this is also, this is the way it's been for a very long time before this film, and it still is the way it is today. And also I love, you know, she talks Lizzie Borden talks in an interview on Mubi about like the casting took years, but that, you know, it was, you know, she met one actor at the YWCA. She met she met someone else on the street or someone through a friend of a friend. Like it was cast in this really, you know, non-traditional way, and that they spent months and months doing what she described as kind of versions of a consciousness raising group, where she just got women in the room and she was intentionally making sure that it was very, you know, culturally diverse, to just talk about what are your issues as a woman, like what, you know, what is keeping you down, what is keeping you up at night, what are you worrying about. And like, I don't know, again, for me, it's like that just speaks to me so much. It's like that this film was born like from women's actual, you know, real life experiences.
Yeah, and concerns, and it speaks to the moment in such a weird, specific way, right? Like there are things in there that this is something I wrestle with as a film critic more and more, just because I'm a middle-aged straight white man. I am the most boring possible accumulation of qualities, and a lot of these movies aren't being made with me in mind. And that's fine. It's absolute. I like those because they show me things that I wouldn't otherwise see. But something like Born in Flames is almost another language, or at least it was the first time I encountered it. I would have been in my, I'm going to guess, early 20s, I suppose, whenever the tape came out, 91 or 92, something like that. So maybe early mid. And I was still trying to understand the breadth of cinema and all the stuff that was in the world. And this comes along, and it's only 10 years old, and it feels like, again, like a transmission from somewhere else. And I get it. I understand why everybody's mad. And then the idea that other people couldn't understand that was really strange to me. And that sort of helped me understand where the movie came from, because this is a movie that's made by people who aren't being listened to.
Yeah.
Right. Like they're not trying to, well, we're in that. Yeah. Sorry. I'm going to back up a little bit. There's this whole thing, like just last week, maybe even over the weekend, I don't even remember, but to bring up Margaret Atwood again, she has been weighing in on the trans conversation. And last week she retweeted a Rosie DiManno op-ed in the Toronto Star about how you can't use the word woman anymore and what's wrong with all that. And it was just annoying. And then a couple of days later, Atwood retweeted without actually commenting on it herself. She's just using her social media position to amplify things. Someone had written a piece about how, boy, the trans activists now, they're so loud, they're so obnoxious. It doesn't help if you're noisy, you should protest politely. And it's the same thing that's been going on for decade upon decade. They said that about Malcolm X. They said that about Martin Luther King, one of the most polite human beings in the world because he knew he had to be. And he was too pushy. Or uppity, I suppose was the word they used in the 60s. But to see an example of that coming out of the queer lesbian community in New York in the 80s, where they're using futurism, because this is an early Afrofuturist work, even though Lizzie Borden's not Black, right? I mean, it's all part of the same movement. It comes from the same place. And to see something like that, and then to go back and read the reviews, which I have subsequently done, and people hated it. Totally. It was dismissed as alien. It was dismissed as violence, and it's exactly the same thing that's happening now in the TERF debate, where people are just, please don't shout me down. You should be more polite and respectful of my terrible opinion. But this, like, Lizzie Borden has no time for that, and this is 40 years ago, and this is as furious a film as I've ever seen, and to realize now that not only has it not lost any of that anger, all the anger still feels fully valid after another 30 years. I wasn't at the TIFF screening. How did Lizzie Borden seem? How did she feel about it 35 years later?
There were a lot of questions equally about, like, how did the film even get made, which is of course fascinating. But there were a lot of questions about seeing this film in 2016, and Lizzie spoke a lot. I mean, Lizzie did center herself as a white woman, and she acknowledged that that is what it is, and that. At times it was problematic, but she made one of an interview I read in Mubi. She said, and I actually didn't know this. She made this film as a response to her first film, Regrouping, which I've never seen.
Yeah, me neither.
Haven't seen yet, I should say.
I don't know where you'd even find it.
I don't know. And one of the critiques of Regrouping is that it's an all-white film, I guess. So she very intentionally set out to make. She wanted to make a film that was more representative of what she was seeing as a feminist experience in New York City in the early 80s, but to really foreground, most of the leads in the film aren't white, right? And so she really intentionally did that. So she talked a lot about Black Lives Matter and other movements, in terms of not just her support and solidarity, but that it's time for those of us, myself included, who have space and profile, etc., and whatever we're doing, to just, be more, not just aware of it, but, sometimes yield it or give it up. And she's also talked a lot, and this will come as no surprise, she moved to LA. She really wanted to make it in the film industry, and she felt that, even as a white woman, that she couldn't get her films made. She couldn't get her scripts read. She couldn't, she just kind of admitted failure in the industry's terms, right? She kind of admitted that she was very, very vulnerable, right? She kind of said, this is going to be the film I'm probably going to be most remembered by, even though she's proud of other films that she's made. But of course she's okay with that because she's, still proud of the film. Something that struck me the first time I saw it, which was also probably similar to you, like early 90s, I'm thinking, early mid-90s, probably mid-90s. I love how the film doesn't present a single feminism or even a single socialism, or whatever it is. And it doesn't present, like, I think it does such an amazing, and I'm sure this, I'm assuming this came out through the collective, writing and acting process, because some of the actors, and of course it's mostly non-actors, were improving, or were kind of writing. They wrote most of the film as they were going, right? Like as they were shooting scenes. But I just really love how the film conveys, intersectionality is an important current buzzword, but it's like the film itself, I just think it just is that, it doesn't, there's moments of humor where they're kind of, poking fun at each other's positions, but it's like the film doesn't take a position, except you could argue at the end, for like the larger desire to control the media and control the means of information control. But that's important for everyone, regardless of whether you're a communist, socialist, feminist, whatever. And it's like, but I do love that the film it presents how women are impacted and oppressed, but not solely through their specific political position. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you say, the common goal of telling your story, of grabbing control of the media and making yourself heard is the one thing everybody wants. Mm-hmm. So we have all of these different agendas that line up in the end with one thing. So the movie can only go in that direction, which is very clever structurally. Everybody has enough time before we reach that ending to make their case, right? Like it's the best and worst thing about any true revolutionary movement is that you cannot do anything without arguing about it for, 3 times longer than it takes to do whatever action is ultimately decided on. And this gets that. Like Born in Flames has these really digressive kind of almost arguments, conversations that become arguments, and they feel like the camera just happened to be in the room with them. Like there's no sense of worrying about blocking a scene or making sure we hit, like the points aren't that important. And I'd love to see, the first assembly cut, which is probably 3 times longer and has a dozen other different conversations that could have been just as interesting, but it's everybody coming at the oppression that they're dealing with from their own perspective. And Borden just lets it roll. She gives us the time with these people to see where they're coming from, which, now I think you'd be racing to get to the next skirmish, the next scene between riot police and our heroes. And she's just not interested in that. She just wants to know them.
I also love the music in the film. Lizzie was pretty embedded in the no wave scene in New York City in the early 80s. And there's musicians, in the film, acting, like Adele Bertai, who was in The Contortions, and many others. But I think she asked a friend of hers who was in the Red Crayola, Mayo Thompson, if he'd write something for the film, and he came up with the song Born in Flames, which is how she titled the film. She hadn't decided a title until she got the song. But again, I mean, it happens to be, some of the music I'm most fond of as a human, but it's like there's this punky, funky energy in the soundtrack, and there's also R&B and Jimi Hendrix and, staple singers. And so it's not just no wave, but there's something energetically in the music that really parallels, the handheld shooting and the editing for me. That's like, it's like, I want to get in the streets, it's like, when is the next demonstration, please? Can we get beyond this pandemic so we can go to Queen's Park or wherever we want to go and, stir some shit up.
Well, there's an election coming up in the spring. I'm sure there'll be lots of yelling about that.
Yes.
And then another one in the fall. We're going to just get so beaten down.
Get ready.
I mean, psychically, not physically. At least I hope not. But yeah, no, it is. It's alive in a way that, I mean, if they worked on it for 5 years, then that means it started in 1978. So it's basically
Right.
as old as punk almost.
Yeah.
Like it is a punk work.
Yeah.
And what amazed me watching it this time is that Catherine freaking Bigelow is in it. I mean, I knew that, but to see her 40 years later, and Eric Bogosian, I think this was the first time he'd been in anything in front of a camera. Ron Vaughter, who I only knew as the therapist from Sex Lies and Videotape, I think.
Right.
And Mark Boone Jr. is a creep in this. He's one of the guys he's billed in Wikipedia as man in subway harassing woman, which kind of nails his persona. I've interviewed him. He's not that guy, but he's the guy you cast to play that guy because he has a certain look. And it's just this, it feels fertile. It feels like they were there at the right time with the camera to capture these cultural movements that then would explode outward in all these other directions. Like Bigelow was, after this, she would go on and make, I think she'd already made The Loveless, her first film with Dafoe. And she's just this incredible cinematic talent who everyone identifies with Los Angeles because that's where she ended up working. But there she is, just banging around in New York, working with these weirdos with the cameras. She's just gravitated to it. I think she might have even still been, no, I think they might have met her at Columbia. I can't remember the exact timeline. John Harkness went to Columbia with her.
Oh, wow.
I think, or maybe NYU. They were classmates in film studies. And I just can't remember when that was.
But if this was 80, the Loveless was 81. So you're totally onto it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just this scene that's happening. And this movie keeps it alive somehow. I do want to talk about the production of it and the way necessity drives almost everything that happened. I mean, did Borden talk about that at the Q&A? Did she discuss the sense that the whole thing is just held together with Scotch tape and whoever they had in front of them that day, and somehow it works?
Yeah, she did. She did talk. I think. Yeah, she did. She definitely talked about the budget and how it was made and how I forget if it was 30,000 or 4. It's something unbelievably small. Like it's just unbelievable. But I remember her saying something like, "You could like how it happened could never happen again." And she didn't she wasn't saying it arrogantly. It was just sort of like, it's like she would never do it again that way, but also like, who would? It's like they were literally borrowing Bolexes, which are 16 millimeter film cameras. They were borrowing, they were using bikes as dollies, and they broke every rule in the filmmaking book. And I also love, I'm trying to find it, of course, but I can't. But she, there's this quote I love where Lizzie Borden says, like, if I'd ever gone to film school, I never would have made it. And I'm so glad I didn't. It's like, because there's this tension, right? It's like how it was written collectively, the fact that it took 5 years, the fact that, the actors are mostly non-actors, but also, writing themselves or improvising themselves, or, that, she shared that someone gave her that footage from, an action in Algeria, right? Someone gave her a tape. There's that. Well, I think it's a single clip, right?
Yeah, we watched it early on.
Yeah, and that for her that was like, oh, okay, I'm going to connect that to a subplot. So it was like, but that only happened. It's like, who makes a film that way? Unless you're Lizzie Borden and the folks around her that were like willing to do it. So yeah, she talked a lot about the spirit of, like, she also had shared, which I appreciated, that through that collective consciousness raising writing process, that some people did drop out. Like for some people it was like, whether they were curious or like committed or like open or like they loved film, or they were an activist who like wanted to make a film. Like along the way, some people were like, you know what, I'm not in it for like, it's I would have loved to have heard more myself. Like, did they drop out because they were fed up, or because they were exhausted,
yeah.
or because they got to pay the bills? It's like, because obviously no one got paid, or if they did, it was just, and Krispy Kreme vouchers or tickets or something. I don't know. Nathan's hot dogs.
Yeah. I somehow picture skee ball tickets being involved. I have no idea why. It's the Coney Island thing. It's just totally. Like, you can get a Cupid doll for being in this Cupid landmark film
and a Nathan's hot dog.
Yeah.
But she also says, I'm going to read this one.
Sure.
Lizzie said, I wanted to create Born in Flames as a kind of fantasy about how various people could come together across race and class lines, which is why I call the film science fiction. I don't know that it's ever possible to do this. And it's like, I remember, because when I first came across it being called a science fiction, I was like, oh, that's not what I just don't, I wouldn't think of it as science fiction myself, although I get it. It's set in the future, right? And it's got this utopian-ish, focus. But it was like, but I love how it's like, for her, the film had to be a utopia, right, across race and class and cultural background lines. Yeah. And it's like, so even if it's only 10 years ahead, then it's science fiction.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you're making this during the first Reagan administration, right, that would be the feeling, right? There's no way this could possibly happen.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. They started in 1978, and the Iran hostage. The Iran hostage crisis was started in 1979. Reagan's elected in 1980, and then it's the Reagan years, right, where you can't say AIDS, and you can't, you can't support women, and you can't support, anyone that's
civil rights,
civil rights. You can't support anyone who's not rich and white, and so it's like that. Yeah, that like the 1978 to 1983 is like it's such a regressive and repressive time in the U.S., right, and.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to remember when the attacks on the NEA started, but it would have been right around that same time. So this would have emerged into that world.
Yeah.
Well, I think Jesse Helms didn't really get rolling on that stuff until
a little later.
Yeah, like Reagan's second term.
Yeah.
They were feeling their oats.
86, maybe 85, 86. Yeah. The culture wars.
Yeah. But I can see this film being seen as one of the first salvos from the, like the filthy hippies or whatever they were calling them at the time, because they were still fighting the 60s.
When someone asked her, what do you miss about New York, like in the 80s, when it was made, and she said, believe it or not, she's like, I miss the grit, like the cities, like it's not gritty anymore, but she's like, I really miss the World Trade Center. And she said, if you'd asked me that before 2001, I would never have said that, because at the time it was like the big phalluses, in the center of wealth, in the financial district. And, they represented a lot of things to hate. But she's like, now that they're gone, I really miss them. I miss them as, I miss the architecture of those buildings. And I mean, who could have, again, this film, the very last shot is the antenna on the top of one of the towers exploding because someone plants a device. And, you can't, you just can't foresee something like that, of course. But it's like the fact that it's captured, the building is captured in this film so beautifully. The opening sequence, shots of the building are amazing, but also that it ends on that, like that's the last shot of the film, is the building, the antenna at least exploding, is really, it's a wild finish, given what's happened since.
I mean, it played like a reminder this time around, just because it opens with, as you said, the buildings aren't hidden that's not like that's the only time we see it, but it is really jarring, that last image popping right in front of you, like, oh right, that's where we are, that's what this is about. And it's the same argument, right, every time. If you don't listen, like if you try to repress the irrepressed, the unrepressed, I'm making some weird id argument, but basically I'm trying to draw it back to, Reagan did fund the Mujahideen, who became Al Qaeda, who became this thing. So I guess she was onto that too, in a really horrible way.
Yeah.
It is like the most impassioned kind of prophecy.
Yeah. No, totally. Yeah.
Even though that hadn't happened yet.
No. And of course that came up when she did the Q&A, right? Like, because it's the film is powerful enough, like you don't need to, but it's like the fact that that happens to be the last, like the last shot of the film is an explosion at the World Trade Center, after they take over the TV station, and after a lot of other things. It's like, wow. But you're right. It's like connecting it to Reagan, Bush, connecting it to the Mujahideen funding, which then became Al Qaeda and the Taliban, which, very recently was just a whole disaster 20 years later. It's like,
Yep.
It's like this film is both, whatever it is now, 38 years old, but it's also 38 minutes old. It's like this is, it's like these things are connected and not really that far in the distance. And, I guess what I was trying to say earlier about science fiction was like, and this is my own weakness. It's like, I always think of science fiction as like, it's like 1,000 years away or whatever. And it's like, so it's also really, it's so cool that they decided to set it just 10 years ahead, when it's like, in 10 years, what am I trying to say? It's like the film, I think, kind of beautifully sets this future as if it's like, it's close, right? Like it's at our fingertips. Like, it's like it was when they made it, but it's like, it still is, because it's like back to where we started in a way. It's like these suppressions and these racisms and these abuses, like they haven't gone away, they haven't gone anywhere, but it's like, it's so close, it's not really that far off.
Yeah, we've just gotten better at denying it, I think, as a species, culturally.
Totally, or tweeting about it and then feeling good, or whatever. It's like
I wrote the shortest possible sentence about this. I'm done. It's depressing as hell. But I think about something like Dennis Goulet's Night Raiders now, which again is shot 2 years ago and commenting on the moment that we're living in somehow. It's this continuum we never learn culturally. Yeah, totally. And Lizzie Borden was out there asking us to, pick up a lesson for almost 40 years ago. So I don't know how well it applies in this case, but the final question on the podcast is always, is there anything of this movie that you've used, borrowed, lifted, stolen, integrated, incorporated into your own work? Does that apply to programming, do you think?
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that as more so as a programmer than a very part-time filmmaker. And especially through my work at Rendezvous with Madness, because we do still program as a committee. And I like to share with folks that, think about how film festivals make their hard decisions. It's more common that once a festival gets, 8, 10, 15 years old, that they move toward an artistic director or program director. They kind of start as a collective or as a group or whatever committees. And then they usually the decision-making gets funneled. And I'm really, it's one of the things I love about programming at Rendezvous is that this year was a 6-person committee, and we make decisions together. And we don't always agree, and that's okay, right? We kind of accept that we're not, we have such different backgrounds and preferences. So I try to bring that spirit that Lizzie Borden brought to creating this amazing film, in terms of working collectively, eyes on the prize, knowing that it's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be fun. We're not always going to agree. Some meetings are going to feel like a so-called waste of time. Some meetings are going to feel so in sync, and like life-changing. But when we get to that date in the calendar that everyone dreads, it's like we're going to have to make decisions together, and we're going to have to, I love the process, and part of me loves it because it's messy, and it's like Born in Flames is messy, right? Like, I can only imagine the production was messy, but it's like as a film, it's messy, right? It's not the most polished thing, which is one of the things I love about it. But it's like I do try to bring this I love working collectively. I've always had collective side projects outside of my day job where it's like, this is my comfort zone, is trying to collaborate to try to make good things happen together, and finding appreciation in the disagreements, right? And also learning. Like, I learned so much from disagreeing with other people, especially film nerds, right? It's like, because I see things differently all the time, and that's like such a gift.
My thanks to Scott Miller Barry. The 2021 Rendezvous with Madness Festival gets underway this Thursday, October 28th, in person at Workman Arts in Toronto and online at workmanarts.com. Thanks also to Jen Paris. She knows what she did. You can find Scott on Twitter at Cineparlour, Cineparlour, and you can find Born in Flames streaming on Canopy in North America, and it's also on Ovid up here in Canada. It's also available on Apple TV for 99 cents right now, and Vimeo on demand. And I'm sure there'll be a Criterion release eventually, right? As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com, where I host the Now What podcast every Friday, in addition to writing far too many words about movies and television. We've got a Haunted Toronto Horror Walk dropping this Thursday. That'll be cool. And you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and pretty much wherever you get your podcasts. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been enjoying us. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're there. Watch movies, stay safe, wear a mask if you go out, get your shot already. I'll see you next time. Happy Halloween.